privilege of your time and the opportunity to present what is commonly referred to as the May revise of this fiscal year's projected budget that I'll be submitting to the legislature shortly after the close of this press conference. I want to just begin by thanking the people of the state of California. This budget that we are about to announce, this historic, unprecedented, generational, and transformational budget is 100% direct responsibility of 40 million people strong that not only met the moment over the course of the last year, but met many different moments and challenges, their remarkable resiliency, their capacity for renewal and recovery is demonstrable and is going to, I think, set this state up for not just a comeback, but an extraordinary decade, arguably century ahead. It's not lost on me when I reflect upon the greatness of the state, looking back in the 50s and 60s when we were truly the tentpole of the American economy. It wasn't by accident that the state of California thrived as much as it did during those decades. We had a formula. Many have written about this, a formula for success. And it was predicated on some foundational principles, the support and investment in issues that are very familiar to all of us, issues like education and infrastructure, investment in research and development, the opportunity to push the boundaries as it relates to a regulatory construct that supported risk-taking but not recklessness, and an open immigration policy where, as some have suggested, we were able to get first-round draft choices, the best and the brightest from around the rest of the world. That formula for success, foundationally, is what we want to reinvigorate and we want to reinvest in today as this state, appropriately stated, is not only coming back but comes roaring back. Let's jump right into the California budget proposal for the fiscal year ending 2022. A balanced budget we are submitting to the legislature of $267.8 billion, a general fund of roughly $197 billion. I am pleased to announce that this budget builds on a strong fiscal foundation, one that allows us to set aside even more resources for reserves, now record high reserves, $24.4 billion. You'll see referenced in slides, this slide, about $16 billion in the rainy day fund, a school stabilization reserve. This is remarkable, $4.6 billion in our school stabilization reserve. You may recall just a few years ago, there was no money, there was no reserve. In fact, some had speculated we would never see reserves in that account. We're setting aside $4.6 billion in that school stabilization reserve. You'll see the operating reserve at $3.4 billion and a safety net reserve of $450 million. $24.4 billion, the highest reserves in states' history. We're doing something few other states in the nation have done. We're using general fund to pay down long-term obligations to STRS and PERS, unfunded health care pension liabilities, long-term liabilities. These retirement liabilities, we're committing $10.9 billion, close to $11 billion to pay down these liabilities, $3.4 billion in the next fiscal year, and then $7.9 billion over the budget period, that 3-year period that we'll be talking a lot about in this budget presentation. So highest reserves in states' history, and using portions of the surplus, which I'll announce in a moment, to pay down long-term obligations, retirement liabilities, to a degree that I think few other states can lay claim. In fact, I don't think there's any other state in the nation that's committed anywhere comparable in terms of general fund support to pay down long-term debt, long-term retirement liabilities. This $100 billion comeback plan, the budget, of course, being larger, but $100 billion bolstered by support from the taxpayers as it relates to an operating surplus, which I'll highlight in a moment, and the federal stimulus, totaling about $27 billion. That $100+ billion comeback plan is the biggest economic recovery package, period, full stop, in California history. It's predicated and foundationally on a number of key areas, though this is by no stretch of the imagination, the totality of the investments or even the presentation that I'll offer today, but it's built on themes that we've been highlighting all year, but notably all week. Focus on immediate relief for people that have been most impacted by COVID-19 and this pandemic, issues that predated this pandemic, the pre-existing conditions in the state of California, housing costs, affordability, and issues of homelessness, transforming, not paving over the old cow path in a vernacular that's often used, but transforming our public education system. More on that in a moment. Investments, historic investments in small businesses, workforce development, economic development, job creation, and of course, issues very sensitive to all Californians, issues related to wildfires, drought, and so much underlying challenges this state, this nation, the world we're living in face around the issue of climate change. Let's talk about the immediate relief package. Close to $12 billion, the largest state tax rebate in American history. No state, including this state, has ever rebated more direct dollars back into the pockets of taxpayers, earning up to $75,000. 2 out of every 3 Californians will receive at least a check of $600 once they file their taxes. This is a good inducement and incentive to file your taxes on Monday to get a direct stimulus check directly back if you're in that income bracket. Roughly 2 out of 3 Californians are. 78% of all tax filers, close to 80% of tax filers, will be eligible for that direct relief. Families with dependents will receive an additional $500, just one time, not per child, $500 check, and I-10 filers, regardless of their immigration status, will receive an additional $500 as well for one reason. It's the right thing to do, and the federal government was not able to provide those supports. The state of California will step in to do what we can. We are also providing, and I want to just thank incredible leadership of Senator Dodd and work that was done by David Chu, Bob Hertzberg, many others, to work through a process to develop a strategy to provide 100%, our commitment and our proposal to pay 100% of people's back rent for the last year or so, and to provide supports going forward for the next few months or so, and help support them by paying down their utilities, past due water bills, power and electric, power/electric and gas bills as well. So $2 billion of relief in that space. $1 billion of that $2 billion directly set aside to deal with water bills. The $5.2 billion federal dollars coming in to support our renters. And again, cannot thank the leadership in the Assembly and Senate enough for the work they did on the first $2.6 billion of this $5.2 billion package. We have more work to do to get from 80% to 100%. That's what we're proposing in this budget and proposing to the legislature. We're adding the $2 billion of direct relief for additional support for water, power, and gas, and providing a historic amount of money for tenant legal aid, something that many members of the legislature have been advocating for, and we're pleased in this proposal to advance here today. Something that we have not highlighted, we'll be using some of the direct stimulus dollars, the $27 billion, to direct $300 million to provide traffic fine forgiveness. A lot of debt that has been owed for fines and fees associated with traffic fines. This is for low-income Californians that accrue this debt, and we believe deserve the benefit of these supports considering the stress and the travails of the last year. These are for tickets going back even pre-pandemic, but through this year to June 30th. Of 2021. The answer to the question is who's eligible. The Judicial Council will make that determination. The Judicial Council will ultimately manage this program. They'll be putting out rules and regulations once the legislature considers this proposal and hopefully adopts and supports that proposal. Issues, again, pre-existing issues that obviously drive a lot of intensity and passion, understandably, and frustration, anger in this state, issues of homelessness. We announced earlier this week, and I'm reminding each and every one of you that this is not a modest commitment to address the issue of homelessness in the state. This is simply without precedent. Put it in perspective, this is a 2-year commitment. Last year, we had an historic budget investment of about $1.3 billion. You can see a multiple of that over the next 2 fiscal years that we're proposing to get 65,000 people off the streets and placed into support. That's significant. 65,000+ placements. In fact, I say plus because it actually is closer to 68,000 based upon our current modeling and analysis. $7 billion building off the successful Home Key, which has become a national model. You may have seen that the Biden administration identified Home Key as a best practice national model. They put up $5 billion nationwide. The state of California is committing $7 billion, building off broadly the proposal and the framework that was advanced last year, an historic effort to procure units and to transition people off the streets, sidewalks, and shelters into homes or into units. We were able to set aside $846 million last year with the incredible leadership and support of the Pro Tem Speaker and others. That allowed us to procure 6,000 housing units in 6 months. 6,000 housing units in 6 months in escrow, people in units. We want to build on that program, $846 million last year. We want to significantly increase this, hotel, motel conversions, more flexibility across the spectrum, not just hotels and motels, other strategies as well. We anticipate broadly with this $7 billion, 46,000 units can be procured and brought into portfolios and communities large and small all up and down the state of California. We have about $1.75 billion of housing that's ready to be built, that is ready to go. It's just backlog waiting for some financing at HCD. This is the backlog that we can unlock, and we're committing $1.75 billion to do that. These are zoned, entitled units that can get moving, and these are on the spectrum of low to very low income. We have additional $447 million to help student homelessness. This is primarily focused on community colleges, CSU, and the UC system. Yes, we see what you see. Those are the encampments growing all up and down the state of California. We have a direct encampment strategy, $193 million to create supports, create opportunities to build partnerships, capacity with local government to address the unique and challenging, often vexing issues with encampments, chronic homelessness, a lot of individuals with behavioral health issues related to those that are self-medicating with drug and alcohol addictions. These create more challenging opportunities for the state, and we are setting aside some more specific resources to direct in that area, as well as resources to transition from the extraordinarily successful project Room Key, distinctive from Home Key. The Room Key provided supports for just shy of 36,000 individuals over the course of the pandemic. A little over 9,200 people now currently getting the support of Room Key. We want to begin to transition people from Room Key, create other opportunities across the spectrum, and that's the $150 million there. We recognize that not all homelessness is the same. One size does not fit all. Chronic single adults out on the streets and sidewalks and encampment, that's a very different issue than issues related to family homelessness. Our goal is to actually establish a framework and goal, and that's to end family homelessness in the state of California. We actually have some good data. We put out a new database, new data system a number of months ago that allowed us to analyze for the first time databases locally and nationally and compare and contrast and make a determination and actually have a numeric number that allows us to establish this goal with some confidence that we can achieve the results that we intend. We also are looking to provide supports not just on new homeless housing, but also focus on prevention, which is foundational in this space, like rent support, but other prevention supports, services of all types, to also build on this commitment. We also are looking to provide grants to local government, looking to leverage and match efforts at the local level. I've been working, and I want to just thank our partners, CSAC, our county partners, League of Cities, our city partners, for their help, for their counsel, their advice, and let me notably thank the Big 13 mayors, Democrats and Republicans, for their incredible advocacy and support in this area. It is, I hope, demonstrable in this record commitment of $12 billion to address homelessness over the next 24-month period. And it simply cannot happen without local leadership. At the end of the day, that is determinative. The state of California is supporting these local efforts. We want to regionalize, and we want to make sure there's direct and transparent accountability at all levels of these expenditures and these investments. We are working with Senator Skinner, among many others, on language around accountability. We look forward to socializing that as our negotiations take shape, but that is foundational as well in working through the issue of addressing homelessness in our state. And speaking of working through, let us be sober and mindful. I took the entire State of the State last January, not this January, but prior January, to talk about the issues of homelessness, housing, and mental health. We talked about the history of our behavioral health system from a federal frame as well as a state frame. It's not lost on me every time I walk into the governor's office. It was a governor's office. It was also office of Ronald Reagan, then governor of the state of California. I just read a wonderful book, Luke Cannon, that wrote about, in detail, Governor Reagan's first budget, where he began the process of dismantling the investments in our state's behavioral health system, our mental health system. It was never followed up with the community-based care that was pledged and promised for many different reasons, many different factors. I'm mindful of that, and I think all of us are living that example as it relates to what's happened on the streets and sidewalks over the course of the last number of decades in this state, increasingly all across this country, but notably here in our state. So what we're committing to today is the biggest investment in addressing what was dismantled decades ago, and that's $3.5 billion in new housing and beds, board and care, adult and senior care, as well as beds that will allow for conservatorships. Remember, we signed a number of bills last year, working very collaboratively with the legislature on conservatorships, Laura's Law, and expanding the capacity for local government to leverage people into treatment and care. The biggest challenge has been where do you place people? And that's why this $3.5 billion is historic, unprecedented. Forgive the hyperbole. You'll hear those words to describe much of what I'm going to present today, because those words are the best way to describe the unprecedented nature of these investments. So these are long-term commitments. This won't happen overnight, but this is building off of a lot of the strategies and plans that we know are effective. Resources have been the issue, but our resourceful mindset will not be an impediment. And speaking of resourceful mindset, I just want to remind people, this was in the January budget. This actually was in last January's budget. It was delayed because of last year's economic conditions, created stress on our budget. You recall a $54.3 billion budget shortfall the last time I was here a year ago, almost to the day. Now a $75.7 million budget surplus, 54.3 to $75.7 million surplus. We are now not just dusting off, but we have augmented, we have amended, we have improved upon the original Cal-Aim proposal, and this is about a once-in-a-generation historic transformation of our Medi-Cal system. It's payment reform, it's the integration of brain health and physical health. It's about incentives for wellness, treating people and their needs early before you care for them in acute stages and pay more later. Also has a component around housing. That's why we're integrating this in the homelessness housing section, but this is truly an exciting and enlivening transformation. I want to thank Secretary Galley for his incredible leadership in this space. Worked on this for years, and we're finally poised to do something big in this Medi-Cal space. By the way, we're also going out on the re-procurement with our managed care plans. This is all aligning up in an historic way to do something big and bold for 1/3 of Californians that currently are on Medi-Cal in the state of California. I highlighted this additional investment, which again is transformative. I highlighted this in relationship to our school budget earlier this week for a reason, that the school system will be integral in advancing this transformation of our mental health care system for youth, 0 to 25. I want to highlight it again in the context more broadly of our behavioral health investments and give it, once again, its due. $4 billion investment over the next number of years to make sure that we're screening every child 0 to 25. We're diagnosing every child 0 to 25, and we're providing treatment to everybody 0 to 25. I was communicating with now Mayor Darrell Steinberg, one of the great champions around behavioral health. These are investments we've long dreamed of. He's long dreamed of. And here we are, this extraordinary moment in California history where we can make the investments to provide all of the services that we need to provide our youth, particularly those that have suffered through tremendous trauma and anxiety, depression over the course of the last year as it relates to working through so many of the conditions we've had to face through this pandemic-induced recession and all the rules and regulations and restrictions and challenges around isolation and loneliness and the like. We're also putting together a platform, one virtual platform to integrate all of this system, a portal. This is also a critical component of this reform. Again, I cannot be more enthusiastic about making this announcement today, and more enthusiastic about what it will mean to millions and millions of children and their future if indeed we succeed in implementing as we are promoting. Another big thing we need to implement, we can't just promote, is to clean this damn state up. And forgive me my language, state's too damn dirty. You drive up the streets, corridors, or rather the freeways, and exits, entrances, commercial corridors, downtowns, all up and down the state of California. You look under those Caltrans overpasses, you see mattresses and see all kinds of things that have been dumped there illegally. We've seen a huge increase in the amount of illegal dumping over the course of the last year. But we've seen this as a persistent problem for years and years. Just think back 2 years ago, when I first got here, feels like 22 years ago, when I first got here and presented the budget, we increased it from $60 million statewide to deal with litter abatement to a little over $100 million. That's it. We thought that was significant. It was an increase. This is altogether a different order of magnitude, $1.5 billion over the next 3 years, this specifically to look not only to clean up and address the issue of litter along our highways, downtowns, and commercial corridors, but also to beautify those same corridors. I was down in Los Angeles the other day on freeway, and we don't want to just clean up all the mess. We want to put some, new trees and maybe a mural, revitalize, reimagine spaces, and also reconnect people. And that's why there's a jobs component of this. We estimate conservatively 15,500 jobs, just 531 state jobs to oversee this. The vast majority of these are jobs for people coming out of reentry or coming through reentry programs, people coming out of homelessness, at-risk youth. We want to build on so many of the successful models, local models. As a former mayor, we had a number of them. Every city, most cities, at least well-managed cities, have effective programs for beautification and youth programs, and we want to incentivize through grant funding, $444 million of that $1.5 billion specifically to local government to incentivize grants and matching funds to amplify their efforts. So we want this $1.5 billion to grow on the basis of those matching strategies, and also includes an arts component. We really believe that what makes California unique and special is our creativity, our innovation. We have so many extraordinary artists that have struggled over the last year in particular, and we want to bring that arts back into the public sphere, back in the public space, and that's a big part of this proposal as well. And so that's the broad strokes on homelessness. And there's a lot of detail, a lot of backup in that space. And we look forward to talking in more detail and specificity with the legislature. I want to thank Scott Wiener for all his advocacy and support, Phil Ting for his advocacy and support. I can continue some of the Rivas, so many others, talking about the issues of homelessness and housing that have been instrumental in helping us develop and define the parameters of that proposal. On the issue of housing, this $1.5 or $1.75 billion is not the totality of our housing budget. You noted that 1.75 that was specific to low-income housing that I put in the homeless bucket. It's north now. You add those together, $3.5 billion. Just wanted to give you some additive numbers here and, as it relates to the May revise in specific detail. We talked about this housing accountability unit. I just want to lead with that because I think it's incredibly important. It's the reason we had to sue one of our cities in the state of California. We need to build more damn housing. The challenge in the state of California is supply and demand. It's Econ 101. We don't develop enough supply to meet the demand. And as a consequence, we see prices continue to rise. There's also issues of time value of money, issues of delay, unnecessary delay and abuse, candidly, of the process and system. And so we have an accountability unit that we think is essential in advancing those efforts and working with local government and technical assistance to move things along. Because at the end of the day, as a former mayor, I understand this intimately. State can set the tone and tenor, but localism, as I often say, will be determinative in terms of the production and construction of actual units working through planning departments and county boards of supervisors. Infill housing, we want to focus, and this is additional $500 million in the May revise, specifically related to VMT. Let me unpack that simple way of saying this. We want to incentivize housing around transit corridors, density bonuses, and investments around housing corridors, looking at jobs housing mix, real quality of life benefits, consistent with many of the pre-existing strategies that have predated my tenure here as governor that have been advanced. We want to also preserve affordable housing. There's about $300 million of this budget is around preserving affordable housing that's about to lose its covenants, these 30-plus year covenants that are due to expire. That affordable covenant expires and they can convert to market rate housing. We want to buy a lot of that back. It's incredibly important in a preservation strategy. That's part of the preserving affordable housing line item. Home ownership, ADUs. We did a lot on ADUs. I want to thank the legislature, Phil Ting, our pro tem, Tony Atkins, so many others that were instrumental in advancing the ADU legislative package, but we want to back it up with some resources, $100 million, first-time home buyer, $100 million, looking to continue to build on our progress. I've identified excess land for development, want resources in that space, and always need to do more on housing construction through apprenticeship programs. Talk about doing more. We are committed to transforming public education. This budget represents a $46.3 billion increase over the next 3 years in investment under Prop 98, $46.3 billion. It increases from what I presented just in January by $17.7 billion, the education budget in this state. This is just simply without precedent. Let's take a look and unpack what that means. That $93.7 billion, by the way, does not include federal money, $15.3 billion. Does not include money that we're likely to put in under the GAN limit, $8.1 billion. We could just as well put out a number that is substantially higher. At minimum, we could put out the GAN number, additional $8.1 billion, and you'd see that number north of $100 billion. But that is a number we want to provide just for the purposes of clarity and a conservative number to give you a sense of how significant this boost in public per pupil investment is this year. $14,000 is now where we are per pupil. Just compare that to 10 years ago. It was a little over $7,000, close to double in the last decade per pupil investment based upon that conservative number of $93.7 billion. If you include the federal dollars, if you include the money that's actually going to K through 12 education this year under the basis of this formula, you add that 15.3, the per pupil gets to $21,000. I never thought I'd be able to say that We've long talked about reaching that 20,000 per pupil threshold. But that, again, is that one-time investment coming from the federal government. Purposes of this slide, this presentation, you'll hear from finance. You can go through the details with Keely and her team, and I'll brag on them at the end of this presentation. But for the purposes of just providing some clarity and conservative conviction to these numbers and backing them up, 14,000 per pupil. We are providing a 5.07% cost of living adjustment. That's base. Suburban districts should be pleased to hear this, not just others. We are paying down $12.9 billion in deferrals, leaving $2.6 billion balance. About 80% of the deferrals we're paying down. You can ask me later, if you wish, why leave $2.6 billion. I will likely answer that it's in relationship to the $4.6 in reserves. We're trying to find some balance in that space. We believe we can better utilize those dollars now with that reserve to more than cover the remaining balance under the deferrals. Nonetheless, we are paying off $12.9 billion of those deferrals in this fiscal year based upon the proposal that today we are submitting to the legislature. We talked earlier this week about our transformation package. Look, we want to make public schools essential. We want to make them competitive. We want to make our public education system enriching. We want to make our public education system what it's capable of being. And that's why we believe in community schools. We believe in breaking down silos and walls, literally and figuratively, connecting dots, building partnerships, public-public partnerships, not just public-private partnerships, with community-based organizations, bringing public health into the public schools, bringing public supports from cities and counties into the public schools, providing the opportunity to leverage and resource. That's all part of this $3 billion community schools program. Arts, music, mental and physical health. We want to accelerate learning with high-dose tutoring. High-dose tutoring produces real results. It's the reason we spell out high-dose tutoring. The ROI, the return on that investment is off the charts, and we need that investment, particularly to advance our equity principles, particularly for those that had some learning loss, though some have suggested you can't lose something you never had. So accelerated learning seems to be a more proactive, more appropriate way to lean in. But this builds on the $4.6 billion that we did just a few months ago with the incredible early action that was advanced in partnership with the legislature. So additional $2.6 billion in this space, but with more targeting around high-dose tutoring. $1.1 billion to reduce class sizes. This is important. It's not just the teacher ratio, but it's a counselor ratio, nurses, and others. That is a principal proposal, something that I think we all could cheer and celebrate. And $1 billion, Governor Schwarzenegger, I hope he's paying attention. This is $1 billion to build on his after-school program. After School for All was advanced many, many years ago, but created a ceiling, not just a floor, of about $550 million. That $1 billion is for this fiscal year, goes to $5 billion by 2025. That $1 billion increases to $5 billion by 2025. By the way, this is not just after school as was defined under that initiative. It also talks about enrichment before and after school, particularly targeted at low-income communities, and enrichment during summer school. We've got to extend the school year and reimagine the school year. I humbly submit, and we're providing flexibility and real resources in that space. No mandates, opportunities for districts to think anew, act in different ways. That's the point of these resources, to stretch the imagination, stretch the boundaries, the jurisdictions with community schools, and provide true surround sound enrichment, particularly for our low-income communities. I want to thank the first partner. I want to thank Senator Skinner. I want to thank so many others, Tom Steyer, his wife, Kat. Others have been huge champions of the Universal Meal Program, healthy meals for our kids. We want to seed some of those efforts without ceding the federal support, and that's that $150 million universal meal proposal you see on that list. Now, some member McCarty, so many others, Speaker himself would say no greater investment we can make than investing in our kids, investing in them early on. We talk often about the achievement gap. I have always countered it's not an achievement gap because that assumes people have been left behind. It's not that they're left behind always. It's so often, more often, that they start behind. It's a readiness gap, and that's why I've been a strong supporter, been crystal clear in my advocacy for years and years as a former mayor, as a candidate for office, now 28 months in as governor of California, and advancing the cause of universal preschool, advancing now the cause with more formality to create a new grade. We are creating a new grade in the state of California, TK, universally, regardless of your income. You will be provided that opportunity. It will be fully implemented over the next number of years. You see the numbers, $900 million this fiscal year, up to $2.7 billion, 2024, 2025. You can see the numbers of individuals that will benefit from this. By the way, the benefit of TK is an additional 3 hours of instruction, not just high quality support. This is extraordinary. I personally just, this enlivens me because I was hoping to get this done as governor over the course of a full term. The idea that we're 28 months in, if we get this proposal through the Assembly and Senate, you have so many great champions there, we can actually produce this result even sooner and get the ball rolling in a very meaningful way to change the trajectory of our young kids' life. By the way, can't do that without recognizing, as my wife often reminds me, of the impacts of all of these proposals and how they're disproportionately felt on the basis of gender and how women bear a disproportionate brunt of so many of the issues that we presented, notably around the issue of education and early supports, including childcare. And I just want to thank the Women's Caucus, Chair Garcia, others were strong, laser-focused advocates for more childcare slots. I hope they'll be pleased with this significant investment that will provide upwards of 100,000 new childcare slots. And by the way, we're front-loading this, using about $4 billion of federal money, also using general fund money, and we are hoping to make those investments, again, on the front end, not just on the back end. So we mean business as it relates to those 100,000 new slots. And so I just included in this frame because these two certainly are connected. And I'll tell you what is connected. That's the opportunity to do something historic and transformational, something that I had the privilege of doing in a modest way as mayor of San Francisco, and it's made a huge, profound difference on the lives of those that benefited. There was a wonderful study that came out of Oklahoma, incredible story in the New York Times, about the efficacy of child savings accounts, because they stretch people's minds. And we always say, once a mind is stretched, it never goes back to its original form. The idea that a young child whose parents don't even have access to a checking or savings account will have their own child savings account in their name stretches a mind in terms of what's possible, stretches the minds of their family members for what's possible. And we know the evidence is overwhelming, and that's why I encourage you to take a look at this New York Times piece that analyzed the evidence and the research of the efficacy of these accounts. We're not asserting a principle or paradigm, but we know that with as little few $100s that a child is 7 times more likely to consider and go to college. Just with a few $100 seeded in an account, we want to seed $500 in accounts of 3.7 million Californians. This is unprecedented in U.S. history. This is an opportunity to address generational poverty. This is an opportunity to stretch a college-going mind, but also opportunity to look at trade school and entrepreneurial spirit, which is also part of this proposal, because we recognize there are many pathways for our children, but we want to provide opportunities once you graduate. And we want people to graduate, and that's also part of this initiative. We also want our young people to understand dollars and common sense. We do not do justice to financial literacy in this country. We're going to get serious. You can't just talk about income inequality. You have to talk about assets and wealth inequality. That's what this proposal is all about. Edwin Nazarian, he gets it. He's been an incredible champion on this, and I thank the Assembly member for his leadership in this space. So many others have advocated for this as well. This is for all LCSFF students. This is federal dollars. We'll take in I said the other day, non-98 general fund, but meant non-98 federal dollars, $2 billion to seed these accounts. And then we'll build on that each and every year for all first graders and keep this going. And we're going to provide additional supplemental support if this is approved, additional supplemental support for foster youth and homeless youth. We've seen this, and I could spend an hour just on this. Just look at the kindergarten college program we launched with the Obama administration when I was mayor. What we saw is we saw members of families that were going to give a kid a new video game, instead put $50, $25 into that child's account to help them with a college-going mindset. There's so many advantages, leveraging money, philanthropic money, local money. I hope federal money. Thank you, Cory Booker, Senator Booker, for your leadership in this space. We hope his bill is successful. But this is an incredible opportunity to build a foundation for our children as well. Look, you can't build a foundation without recognizing the most important impact in terms of the quality and outcome of a young child's experience in the K-12 education system is that relationship with a caring teacher. That's why we need to do more to care for our teachers, and we need to have their backs because they have our children's back, particularly as we move back into full-time in-person instruction later this fall. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We want to build on the incredible work Linda Darling-Hammond has been doing, and the Superintendent of Public Education, Tony Thurmond, has been advocating for. So many others from the chair of our respective committees, Leva and O'Donnell, have been advocating for stronger support for teacher training and recruitment. Golden State Teacher Grant Program's been a big success, doesn't have enough money, $500 million. Expanded teacher residency, we know that works, more money. More teacher training and recruitment also includes grants for teaching in highly impactful subject matters like STEM, math, science, where we're actually having challenge recruiting teachers. We're going to provide additional stipends as well for teaching in high poverty districts and underperforming schools, all part of this broader spectrum of support. So preparing teachers, we're building on some supports in the past, but with resources that we've never had in the present and in the future, and that's reflected in this education budget as well. $2 billion. $2 billion is also being proposed to get our kids back safely in-person instruction, 100% universally this fall, with the exemptions that are pre-existing in terms of exemptions that are as of right based on long-standing statute, meaning we want kids back in person this fall, full-time. And on June 30th, midnight, the statute in the state of California will make that crystal clear that that is indeed a requirement. But we want to back it up with support. And we recognize we got a lot more work still to do to deal with anxiety, not just with teachers, but with parents, about our ability to safely bring back our kids into full-time in-person instruction. And that's why we're committing an additional $2 billion, building off the work that we did with the legislature and the incredible leadership of Pro Tem Atkins and Speaker Rendon. And I say that because I can personally lay claim to that, where they drove that $6.6 billion plan with their legislative leaders. And we want to build on that momentum and that incredible early support to support the health and wellness of our kids as we move back in-person instruction. One of the things we don't want to go back to is the experience we had last year. And that was the experience of recognizing the haves and have-nots, the divide, this digital divide. I guess the point is you can, play in the margins. You can continue to do what you've done, but you'll get nothing more than what you got. I have no interest in that, and I hope the legislature doesn't either. I know that Lena Gonzalez doesn't. I know that Aguilar Curry does not. They don't want to play small ball. They want to actually solve this. Broadband for all. Let's do this. $7 billion. Thank you to the Biden administration. Thank you for the federal dollars. This is an opportunity, backed with some general fund money as well, but primarily federal dollars, to finally close this digital divide, to do justice, not just for our kids. This could just easily be outside of the education agenda, but for our rural communities as part of an economic development strategy, and connecting the dots in all parts of this state to build that middle mile, to build that last mile, to work with our tribal nations. address the issue of sovereignty, but still provide support. We can make this happen, and we're putting a significant amount of money to advance that cause. Let's get this done once and for all so that no future administration is talking about the scourge of the digital divide, and we don't have to go back to the old ways of thinking and doing. This is what the federal stimulus, from my perspective, was all about: catalytic investments to make generational change. This is one of those investments that will pay dividends for generations. Economic opportunities, address the issue of equity. All of these things are potentially advanced if we are successful with this proposal and the work that many legislative leaders have advanced and are underway. That said, we also believe that you should not end your your learning by 12th grade. We want to extend that beyond, and that's why we are looking to make, again, forgive me, historic investments into higher education. We're looking at investments to drive down the cost of attendance. I'll get to that in a moment, that move beyond tuition, which again is the modest cost of attendance, particularly in California, that does so much better than most states. We want to cut the cost of student housing in particular. I want to deal with the racket. Respectfully, I say this, I said it last year, I'll say it again, it hasn't changed. The racket that is the textbook industry, that is abusive to common sense and mindset in terms of the usury nature of the costs associated with textbooks that make no sense whatsoever, except to those that are the beneficiary of huge rewards on the backs of our children, many of them. But we also recognize we need to do more in terms of goal setting, and that's why we're creating a new 70% attainment goal by 2030 for all 25 to 64-year-olds in the state of California. We are setting an attainment goal of 70%, either bachelor degrees or AAs, 30% AAs, 40% BAs, and that's the attainment goal. We're working with our systems of higher education on a 21st century compact. I'm previewing it, more on that later, which will spell out our expectations of the state in relationship to our expectation of our systems of higher learning. Let's talk about UC. This is remarkable. $506 million of ongoing investments. Restoring the cuts that were made last year and increasing the base funding by 5%. $506 million ongoing. One time, $451 million. You can see that for deferred maintenance for issues important to me since I still struggle with Dyslexia Center, and the importance of the research, particularly at UCSF, and the incredible work they're doing in that space. We also believe California should be a no-kill state. I talked about that last year. We couldn't go as far as we wanted to. That's the UC Davis Animal Shelter Medicine Program. We believe we can accomplish that substantially with these grants. Not completely, but substantially. $957 million. By the way, just the UC and CSU budgets alone are over $2.3 billion increases this fiscal year. Put that in perspective. And forgive me if I'm wrong on this, double check, but I believe it was $136 million. That was in the January budget for ongoing investment at UC, 136 to 506. And of course, these one-time investments are substantially greater, and this does not include the federal money that UC will get, which is about $865 million of additional support from the Biden administration. As it relates to the CSU, $1.4 billion, $596 million. Compare that to $200 million in the January budget, from $200 now to $596, January to May. You'll see the $833 million in the one-time investments, including creating a new Cal Poly. I'm a big supporter of Cal Polys. We have two. We want to create a third, and that's the significant investment, $433 million. We've been working with the Board of Trustees, incredible new leader at the CSU, about this opportunity to revitalize the economy in Northern California in and around Humboldt State, and look at this opportunity to have a third polytechnic campus in our state. Deferred maintenance, you see the work on STEM Center down in Southern California. I want to thank Senator Padilla for a strong advocacy in that space. Mark Ridley, so many others that have called in on that. more computing talent, coding investments, and always more on professional development. By the way, that $1.4 billion on CSU does not include the $1.5 billion coming from the federal government. So on top of this, the federal government's providing direct $1.5 billion. You see $865 million coming directly, not represented in that number either. $3.6 billion for community college, where we'll fully retire the deferrals. There's a COLA. You can see the work to do more on zero textbook costs. This doesn't provide it universally, but put it in perspective. I think we put $5 million a couple of years ago, $15 million last year to address costs of textbooks, more open source textbooks, and to really go after improvements in this space and address the full cost of attendance. We're going to put if this is successful, $115 million into that space. You can see the work on dual enrollment, ESL, housing, basic needs, and more on that in a moment. By the way, let me just go back. One of the most significant things that we are doing as it relates to our higher education system is we're committing $4 billion for student housing. That's in addition to what we've just presented, $4 billion of additional resources to address student housing. As I said, one of the biggest factor of cost is not tuition. The vast majority of Californians don't pay tuition because of our long-standing commitment to people, low income and many in the middle class. But the costs are still borne on housing, textbooks, and other related travel expenses. And that's why we want to make a big dent with a $4 billion proposal on student housing. So forgive me for extending the portion of that presentation, but that's important oversight I didn't want to lose. As it relates to issues that are top of mind, issues related to jobs, infrastructure, issues related to the economy, I want to remind people, we talk about California, we're rolling back 41% of America's jobs came out of the state of California in February, 275,000 plus, almost 276,000 jobs in February, March. Those are subject, by the way, to being adjusted, but those are the numbers that came out of the federal agency that give you a sense of California's recovery. Our employment is still too high. None of us are naive about that, and the impacts on small businesses over the last year have been profound, particularly in the food industry, hospitality, and entertainment industry. That's why, working with the legislature, we were very pleased with Senator Caballero, so many other leaders, to support an effort to provide direct grants of $5,000 to $25,000 for small businesses. We did $2.5 billion in early action. We want to build on that with an additional $1.5 billion that we're proposing in this budget to take care of so many of those that are applicants that haven't yet gotten vetted and haven't received their support. We also want to remind everybody of what we built a few weeks ago, and that was a framework over the next number of years, 5.5, almost 6 years, to provide a tax cut for small businesses, $6.2 billion. That was part of what we referred to as the PPP conformity. It's the largest tax cut in our state for small businesses, $6.2 billion. I want to thank Autumn Burke, others for their incredible leadership on that bill. And also we are providing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that I'll enumerate right here in grants and loans to businesses. We'll start with an $895 million appropriation that will come with the support of the federal government for a small business credit initiative. We are going to take our Cal Competes program from $180 million, we'll double the 180 to 360, and we're going to add $250 million as a one-time grant to expand those that are eligible under Cal Competes. That's the 430. As it relates to ports, we recognize ports have been impacted disproportionately as it relates to trade impacts associated with global slowdown in the economy because of this pandemic. Port revenue loss has been profound and significant. That's the $250 million. We're going to build on the successful Main Street hiring tax credit, $1,000 tax credits for people that retain or hire individuals. Small businesses are taking advantage of it. Not as many as we would hope, because many, don't think are aware of this program. So we're going to do more outreach, but we want to provide additional resources, roll over the 47 that's been unused, provide another $100 million in that tax credit. And we want to extend the successful manufacturing sales tax credit, particularly in the green tech industry. We want to extend those sales tax exclusions with an additional $100 million. One of the things as well, we recognize impact on hospitality industry has also impacted Visit California's ability to invest in promoting California and promoting the extraordinary hospitality industry that's second to none in this $145 billion industry. And that's why we are investing $95 million of promotion tourism in this state. No one does it better than Visit California. Some of the best ads, social media marketing materials in the country, best in class. I see no greater use of building back a sense of pride and spirit and opportunity to bring back the economy as well as bring tourists from all around the world across this country back to visit California. That $95 million we think will make a real impact. By the way, there are 5 or 6 legislators, forgive me, I in peril of always forgetting 1 or 2, I want to thank you all, you know who you are, being strong advocates and proponents of these dollars. Loan guarantees through our iBank, the California Dream Fund, that's specifically for $10,000 grants for businesses that candidly don't have access to credit or checking, don't have access to traditional means of getting funds. These are those smaller grants, many of them first generation immigrants, many mixed status as it relates to ownership, having a difficult time to access not just credit but resources. The California Film Tax Credit, this is an opportunity for all of those productions, TV and others, in places like Georgia, whose values don't necessarily always align with the production crews, to consider coming back to the state of California, and that's what that $30 million intends to do. And yes, to all of you that ask almost on a weekly basis, what are we doing about SALT and the tax increase that the Trump administration imposed upon us and Mitch McConnell a number of years ago, that tax increase that impacted disproportionately large blue states like California. We're trying to address that tax increase of the Trump-McConnell era. And we have a partial fix, SALT, for S corporations, S-corps, as they're commonly referred to. We're working with Speaker Pelosi, Senator Schumer, and President Biden to see if we can ultimately address that, though it is a tax that will ultimately sunset, or rather the SALT deduction limitations will ultimately sunset in just a few years if indeed they're unable to make earlier action or take earlier action. Speaking of taking action, a few more slides and we'll move on to Q&A. Incredibly important to talk about jobs in relationship to infrastructure and capital. $52 billion 5-year capital plan we're proposing. By the way, that includes $4.2 billion for high-speed rail. And I don't know if you've checked your phones, if it's come out yet, but it will shortly if it hasn't already. The return of the high-speed rail dollars that the Trump administration took from Californians. Those dollars are coming back into the state, reinforcing we have a real federal partner with our high-speed rail system, an incredible opportunity to finish the work in the Central Valley and then build out those extensions into the Bay Area and down into Southern California. $3.1 billion. Speaking of Southern California, not exclusively, additional general fund money, $3.1 billion. We listened to the leadership represented in various different committees. Laura Friedman, thank you for your advocacy and support of these dollars. Speaker Rendon, thank you for your advocacy and support of these dollars. Not lost on us, the 2028 Olympics and the transformative opportunities to fast track and invest in connecting dots in our infrastructure presents itself, and that's a portion of the resources in that $3.1 billion package. By the way, the transportation budget's roughly $11 billion. It includes, portion of that is SB1 at $4.6 billion, other supports, including deferred maintenance, the 3.9, and acceleration of big projects, bonds, where we can move and drive the investment and get shovels in the ground and get our construction building trades union representatives working at even greater numbers than they are today. $3.6 billion, this is without precedent, simply without precedent in California history, the largest workforce development investment proposal that's ever been made. $1 billion specifically to provide grants from $1,000 to $2,500 for those that have lost their job, to allow them to go back to school and or start a business with flexibility and some creativity to provide these grants in a way that we haven't allowed for or even afforded in the past. $1 billion for an endowment. This learning aligned employment is an endowment that we want to provide that connects the dots between economy and where it's going and our institutions of higher learning. This is incredibly important as part of our 21st Century Compact with UC and CSU, that we start to be more prescriptive in aligning economic growth and opportunity to workforce development and curriculum. And that's what this $1 billion endowment proposes to do with work-study programs and apprenticeship programs that align and advance that cause. Here's something that's also important to me, and I hope a cause that unites all of us, and that's transitioning to a carbon-neutral economy. We're not playing small ball here, and I hope people can appreciate, particularly in Kern County. I hope folks in Kern County can appreciate, because Kern County will be the disproportionate beneficiary of $750 million of transitioning to carbon neutrality. We are transitioning from the old ways of energy production and exploration to the opportunities that present themselves anew. It's remarkable. I was just driving through Kern County 48 hours ago, and within literally seconds, you're seeing hundreds and hundreds, appear to be thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of oil rigs. Seconds later, one of the largest solar projects in the world, not just the nation. So you see this contrast taking shape. What we want is to be there, support those in that transition, not rhetorically. People talk all the time about just transition and they walk away. We want to be there substantively to help with that workforce to transition to carbon neutrality. I'm going to talk more about another proposal we have in this place to back this up. But $750 million is not insignificant, and that's part of this package. Accordingly, we also want to build on some of the incredible high road training program partnerships that we have in the state, the amazing apprenticeship programs we have in the state, and you see a huge number there, $417 million to advance that cause. More partnerships as part of the Fresno effort we announced 2 years ago. We have a partnership in Fresno, in San Joaquin, and Imperial counties about reimagining the future and about what the economic opportunities look like. And we've seeded that over the course of the last number of years. We're going to expand that to 8 additional regions, including the regions that we identified as regions that are vulnerable in a transition, like Kern County. And so that's the $250 million, which we're very excited about. And these are proven partnerships, true public-private partnerships, aligning strategies, regionalizing efforts. And I just want to thank everybody, particularly in the Central Valley, for all their hard work in developing these partnerships, and we want to be there having your back and to help fund them. Speaking of having their back, people literally breaking their backs, helping the most vulnerable Californians in IHSS, in home supportive services. We want to look at career pathways. We want to look at career opportunities for IHSS workers. This is something we've been long talking about, hoping to get done this year. It looks like my friend April Verrett, Doug Moore, and others, I hope you have a smile on your face when you learn about these efforts, and I want to just acknowledge your efforts and thank you for helping us design components of this proposal. Speaking of components, as the Bible teaches us, we're many parts, but one body. And I say that to make this point. I don't think there's anything more important in the United States of America, let alone the state of California, than just enthralling ourselves with the notion that we're very different from one another, regardless of our political stripes, regardless of our geographic proximity to one another. We've got to start connecting in a more meaningful and substantive way across our differences. That's what service is all about. That's what volunteerism is all about. My political hero is Sarge Shriver. the vernacular of the 60s around community opportunity, many of the things Clinton administration picked up on around responsibility, all coming out of the work around the Peace Corps and legal aid to the poor. We need to bring back that spirit. We need to bring back that narrative. And we need to bring back support for all of these incredible programs, Youth Works and all these other amazing volunteer initiatives out there through AmeriCorps and the like. And so that's what this proposal does, but it does it in a way we haven't been able to do in the past. This is really exciting. Looking at a minimum of 12,500 students to allow them to invest in community building projects, to invest in addressing some of the most vexing needs in their community, provide service, but also be rewarded for that service with stipends and scholarships. 450 hours for 9 months. This is something no other state's doing. This country should do this at scale with respect. If this country can get serious about this, we can solve 90% of the damn problems in this country. We just don't share common experiences like we used to. And while this is significant, I imagine we'd probably have to quadruple this in order to have the bigger, broader impact that we need. But nonetheless, it's a good place to start. Let's build on this, but this is an incredible opportunity. And I just want to thank Josh Friday, the whole Cal Volunteers team, and Spirit of Daniel Zingali and Maria Shriver, not just her father, Sarge Shriver, for the opportunity to make this proposal and presentation and provide this as an opportunity for the legislature to consider. Accordingly, we want to build on incredible youth volunteer efforts, but also job opportunities that are happening at the local level. I'm so proud that Michael Tubbs decided to join the administration in an advisory role. Former Mayor of Stockton has been out front on issues of UBI up front in terms of summer youth job programs. I was talking to Mayor Garcetti, Mayor Garcia, Mayor Liccardo, and of course Mayor Steinberg and Libby Schaff and London Breed. I can go down the list, all of them saying, give us more support for summer youth jobs, even beyond the summer. Do some matching grants, and that's what the $200 million of matching grants are about. And we're very, very excited about that proposal as well. I was also excited to recognize earlier this week the opportunity not just to declare a declaration of emergency and raise anxiety and create flexibility as it relates to issues of drought and water supply and conveyance and hydrology in the state, but also to provide some relief in this respect by building on Senator Atkins and the Senate's incredible leadership as it relates to drought resilience and their proposals around water security and water recycling efforts and conveyance and conjunctive use and issues across the spectrum. Things that we laid out in detail in our water portfolio strategy includes 100 specific strategies and plans to address modernizing and having a 22nd century vision for water supply and reliability in the state. So we're putting out $5.1 billion in a drought resilience package. We announced this a few days ago. Up at San Juan Reservoir with Congressman Costa and with Assembly Member Adam Gray. Many others enthusiastically embraced core principles of this proposal around safe drinking water, around the issues of flood resilience. You see groundwater cleanup and recycling across the spectrum, small water relief emergency grants for the short run related to the acuity of the drought, long-term strategies around bringing back floodplains and nature-based solutions, which are foundational in any serious proposal around drought resilience, Salton Sea support in this space, a number of other areas that will be advanced if indeed we're successful with that $5.1 billion proposal. Speaking of a proposal, we talked about a $1 billion record investment in wildfire and emergency response. That is now $2 billion. We did $536 million of it as an early action. We're now making the largest investment in California history for new firefighting equipment. And these are the Black Hawk helicopters. We have 5. We've got 4 more coming in very shortly. We've got the C-130s coming in next year, and they'll start coming in en masse. We're looking more forest health investment, vegetation management, home hardening. But the biggest increase, if you ask what's the difference between this proposal in January and the proposal we're making here today, it's a lot more investment into grants for community emergency response and resilience, more grants and supports for an all hazards frame, not just wildfires, but emergency response broadly defined. My wife wasn't woken up. She was awake 9:30 the other night with that earthquake that actually reached down into Fair Oaks, not just Truckee, a reminder of Mother Nature's fury. and we need to be prepared for the next earthquake, and that's why this includes a $17 million appropriation for the earthquake warning system and continuing to build on the supports that we've advanced for a course of many years and in January, but providing even more resources into this year. Looking at resources, we'll be rolling out a detailed strategy for a 22nd century electric grid. Will be coming out very, very shortly. We want to back that up with some real resources. You'll see $900 million here for the electric grid of the 22nd century. This is large-scale storage projects. This is about improvement of decarbonizing our industrial and food production plants. This is about green hydrogen. We're going to talk more about green hydrogen in this country, more about the fuels and the opportunity, the hydrogen economy. It's not just a consumer play. This is about large-scale conversion for green hydrogen. California needs to dominate in this space, as we are going to propose, not to dominate, but to compete with our East Coast partners. We're about to make a huge announcement, preview. If you ask me, I'll say nothing more than soon around wind development, offshore wind development. When working with the Secretary of Interior, the Secretary of Defense, and the Biden administration, they want to announce together very shortly an incredible opportunity for offshore wind development in this state. And so those are resources all in that space. We have a goal to completely eliminate traditional fueled vehicles in the state, so we never have to suffer through the images we're seeing in the East Coast of the United States any longer. Let's start to wake up to the opportunities, not to be reliant on foreign adversaries or interventions from those looking to extract resources through cyber attacks and or other foreign governments that can abuse their privileges and rights as it relates to the security and availability of fossil fuels. We have that opportunity. California is leading the nation in the zero emissions mandate. We saw the companies follow very shortly with similar calls to reach that 2035 goal. Just today, you saw a $7.5 billion commitment from Hyundai, $7.5 billion to invest in electric vehicle manufacturing. What a timely announcement we're making here today, $3.2 billion over the next few years to invest in advancing these goals. Look at these numbers, 1,000 school buses we want to convert from diesel into green, electric, clean. Transit, another 1,000, 1,150 drayage trucks. This is a big deal. Biden administration has been talking a lot about this. They're hoping to do something with the Senate, but we're doing it. We're not waiting around. You see Clean Cars for All. Thank you, Phil Ting, for your strong advocacy in this space, many others in the legislature, but targeting rebates to low-income communities, $800+ million, infrastructure across the spectrum, $250 million specifically for manufacturing grants. Hyundai, we hope you are listening. Speaking of climate, resiliency, transition, $1.3 billion climate resilience package, $495 million to invest in addressing issues, large and small, building partnerships and grants with what's happening already at the local level, building on that as it relates to the urban greening strategies and some of the heat issues that we're facing some of our cities, and addressing ways to softening the edges, greening these communities. We're looking at sea level rise issues, flooding issues, and this is what I was looking forward to highlighting, a $200 million commitment to capping abandoned oil wells. $200 million commitment. You got the $750 million for just transition to advance our low carbon green growth goals. You got $250 million to build partnerships as it relates to a vision of the future. And then you have $200 million specific tangible dollars to cap abandoned oil wells. We mean business about this transition and moving away from fossil fuels and transitioning in a thoughtful and judicious way to a greener and cleaner future. Speaking of cleaner, not just greener future, I want to just thank the speaker. I want to thank Kevin DeLeon. I want to thank Hilda Solis. I can go through a long list. Their strong advocacy around Exide cleanup, $454 million. And an additional $500 million. We have never, ever made investments in this space comparably to address environmental justice issues, toxic cleanup issues. There are many more Exides, maybe not the scale and scope of Exide, but there are a lot of other sites that need our attention, and we'll get it with this commitment, almost $1 billion on toxic cleanup, all in the bucket of low carbon, green growth, changing the way we produce and consume energy. And speaking of low carbon, green growth, never been an investment in ag like the investment that we're proposing to make today. $794 million, and what we refer to as climate smart agriculture is about old diesel equipment being replaced. This is about alternatives to burning a lot. You see out there, the more you drive around, all the burning that's going on leads to negative air quality. $100 million in healthy soils and soils management, something my wife's been a strong advocate for, and carbon sequestration opportunities and new strategies to build on partnerships that exist, private partnerships, not just investing in the public sphere. A climate catalyst fund, continue to invest in technology and innovation. We're looking at $30 million farm to school, which is an incredible program. Forgive me again, Jen, something else you've been a very strong advocate for high quality produce, getting our kids fed, but doing it in a way where it advances their health and their educational outcomes. Again, Kat Tether, thank you for your work in that space as well. Our incredible secretary who's doing a remarkable job, Karen Ross, thank you as well for your vision in this space. More investments across the spectrum in equitable food, as well as direct assistance to small farmers that are struggling in this very difficult time, as well as apprenticeship opportunities. We'll just close up with two more slides, and that is to discuss briefly some topics that are very, very personal to a lot of folks in the legislature and a lot of folks that will be beneficiaries of these announcements. The rate increases that were suspended the last year, provider rate increases under Prop 56, they'll be eliminated. We're looking to eliminate that 7% wage reduction or rate reduction at IHSS. Developmental disability services, fully restored. The early investments we're making in ACEs screening, an incredible Surgeon General, a tampon, as well as diaper tax suspensions, we'll move those off. We're expanding health care regardless of your immigration status, not just 0 to 26, but now everybody's 60 years and over. There's a doula benefit. Talk about cultural competency. That's now going to be part of the Medi-Cal expansion as well, postpartum, extending that for a year. And thank you to all the legislative leaders that reached out to me, interestingly and wonderfully, on medically tailored meals and keeping that as a Medi-Cal eligible expansion, as well as some reentry expansions in this space. So all of that as part of a broader announcement. But I need to just close out with a few additional points, and that is around accountability and transparency. This unprecedented opportunity to invest over $100 billion in this remarkable comeback, California. We need to be more accountable to every dollar that is spent and invested. We need to be more accountable to every federal dollar that's come in. And we're building out a new unit. It's an accountability unit to make sure we're drawing down our resources, grants, that also includes federal dollars related to disaster recovery, to make sure that we're utilizing and expressing ourselves, utilizing our talents and expressing ourselves so that we're getting reimbursed at the highest levels through FEMA and the federal government. So we've never done this at this scale. It's been a workload issue. We want to build out a brand new accountability unit in the state. I'm going to talk about government efficiency right here. We still want to do this. We want to consolidate with new work styles, new arrangements, new strategies for consolidating leased spaces, looking at office spaces anew and differently. We could become more efficient. We have a minimum expenditure reduction of 5%. We're going to make that happen. That's going to be permanent. As part of an announcement last year, we're not lifting that. We want to make that permanent. We want to build off that announcement into the future. And then on digital transformation. DMV, we're going to put some real money into preparing for the RE-ILD program, $133+ million for technology improvements, efficiencies across the spectrum. It's good to note that 97% of all of the DMV transactions are now digital. The DMV has to reimagine itself to the digital age. We need to do those digital driver's licenses. We want to make real investments in that space. And yes, EDD. We want to address issues there. We've put millions and millions of dollars in triaging. We want to reimagine benefits management system, benefits broadly, by the way, not just EDD. We want to look beyond just EDD, the antiquated IT systems we inherited 28 months ago. By the way, we is the collective we, states large and small. I've talked to governors without exception struggling with these same issues that California has struggled with. We just don't want to continue down that path. So we're making investments to improve verifications, address the backlog. We've made great progress on the 1.6 million folks that are backlogged, with 35% increase just in reduction of wait times in the last month. It's still vexing, still challenging. And then we want to reimagine the IT upgrade, and there's dollars in here that will do that, including dollars to address language access. On issues of innovation across the spectrum, this is the .gov space. We're also looking at Office of Digital Innovation and the Department of Technology by providing grant funds to do more than they've done in the past. And just briefly, we talked about the closure of 2 prisons. I just want to remind people that we are closing 2 prisons in this state, one on September of this year, 2021, one in June of 2022, DVI and CCC, respectfully. We're going to be reimagining the Department of Juvenile Justice with a new office. I want to thank all the legislative leaders for their support in that space. We're completely transforming Valley State Prison, completely reimagining it into a campus-like environment. We're going to put rehabilitation back in to the R at CDCR. And we're going to do something big and bold. And I'll just leave it at that. We can get in details another time as it relates to the transformation of that state prison. We also are going to expand Friday visitations. We don't think it. Data bears out. Stress, strain of families with the modification of visitations because of COVID-19 put a lot of pressure on families, but also pressure on our reentry programs because we know the outcomes are muted on the basis of lack of engagement with family members. These visitations can reduce recidivism and have a strong impact and outcome as it relates to reentry. We have new surveillance systems, more accountability with security cameras, with our security guards within the system, within the institution, but also providing more security cameras across the spectrum in the institutions more properly. And we're also going to address some of the backlogs the department or rather at the Board of Parole hearing. Just briefly, pretrial release, people asked $210 million this year. CalVIP for small grants to address the issue of violence. Thank you, Buffy Wicks. Thank you to all the legislative leaders, Skinner and others that reached out on this. $200 million. I think this will be well received to address some of these issues relating to crime prevention up and down this state. And of course, we're looking to use technology in a more proactive way as it relates to rehabilitation in this state. Of course, we close always by reminding everybody that this state, its greatest pride is its diversity, majority minority state. We are a universal state. We believe in pluralism. We are a state that doesn't tolerate diversity, it celebrates diversity. And we think we need to do more to immigrate, to help support immigrants, integrate into this state. We're doing that in terms of healthcare. We're doing that in terms of pandemic supports. We're doing that in terms of financial supports. But we're also doing that to address issues around naturalization for DACA and helping address some of the fees associated with that. We're going to do that with wraparound legal services for our immigrants. We're going to do that for community college ESL classes, which is really important. And that was something that came out of our economic task force, and I want to thank the leaders for that recommendation. And then, yes, we're not going to be passive and responsive. We want to be proactive on border efforts, supporting the Biden administration, not a closed fist, not trying to get headlines, trying to work collaboratively with the Biden administration to address legal and illegal crossings and do so in a compassionate, thoughtful, and judicious way. And that's represented in that $105 million here as well. So that's the Roarback Plan. That's an unprecedented commitment to the people of California, brought to you by the people of California. And I'll close as I ended, or end as I closed, or end as I began, as it were, by just thanking California. Thank you for everything you've had to persevere through. Thank you for your incredible support. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your resiliency, your grit, your determination. Thank you for believing not only in yourselves, but each other. And thank you for the privilege of being able to make this investment today in your future. This is a generational budget. This is an historic, transformational budget. This is not a budget that plays small ball. We're not playing in the margins. We're not trying to fail more efficiently. We're trying to do things the state has talked about but never been able to accomplish because we never had the resources to do it. We want to do it in a way that's mindful that this moment shall pass. These historic budget revenues and operating surpluses are not the new norm. We're not naive about that. And that's why we want to batten down the hatch and pay down pension obligations, pay down debt, and continue our prudent fiscal practices by building up our reserves and our resiliency across the spectrum. Use one-time money for one-time purposes, appropriately balanced, not just for today, but over the course of the next number of years. Invest in our growth engines, invest in our men and women, the small businesses that are really the backbone of our economic recovery, and make sure we're there for the most vulnerable and those that have been impacted by this pandemic, and that's low-income individuals and those disproportionately represented in the Latino and African American communities. I'm proud of this budget. I'm proud of our team and Keely Bosser and Ana Montesantos and their incredible leadership and stewardship. I'm proud of the entire legislature and the incredible partnerships that we forged over the course of the last year, and notably just in the last few months, and the early actions we took, the deliberative focus on solutions, and that spirit, I hope, will continue through this budget process. Again, this is our plan to get California not only back on its feet, but California roaring back once again in its rightful status as the most essential and dominant state, not only in the United States, but one of the most essential and dominant economies anywhere else in the world. And with that, happy now to take any questions.
Hey, Governor, thanks for taking our questions. Hundreds of millions of dollars in this budget to address homeless encampments and to encourage local governments to build housing. It looks like a lot of carrot and less stick, and I'm curious to know, is this just money that's being given to local governments, or are there measures to compel people out of encampments or to push local governments to build housing and potentially face penalties if not?
Well, as you heard on Tuesday in the morning, and in the afternoon on Tuesday, two subsequent announcements in the space, we talked a lot about accountability. So the answer is no. It's not just about handing out money with no accountability. It is about accountability. It is about transparency. And it's about measurable results. There are plenty of carrots, but there also are sticks. And I've made it clear today as well in the presentation, and I noted a specific legislative leader, Senator Skinner, who's been a strong advocate for accountability, but broadly, Senator Wiener and Chu, Ting, others, so many others have been also making the case for renewed efforts on accountability language, and that will be part of the budget trailer bill. And those are conversations, as I noted in the presentation today, that are ongoing, and the details will be forthcoming. We're also working with mayors up and down the state on that language as well, and I've got to say, I've been incredibly inspired and grateful to hear from people like Darrell Steinberg and Mark Ridley Thomas, who co-chaired some of our task force work, that they're demanding those accountability measures be included in this package as well. And that's exactly the spirit that we will advance, and look forward to talking more about that before this budget is signed.
Thank you. Laurel Rosenhall with Cal Matters. Regarding the people who work in state prisons, do you have any intention to make it a requirement for prison employees to be COVID vaccinated?
I want to thank Glenn and the CCPOA team, the president. Glenn has been very proactive in terms of working to build trusted messengers, to build trust with his members, recognizing so many have not been vaccinated. He's not giving up on those efforts, and I applaud him for those efforts, and we have his back in advancing those efforts. That's where we are today in supporting that kind of outreach and seeing how far we can go. We have no further announcement to make as it relates to whether or not we're going to mandate those vaccines. We just want to give the opportunity to build on the work that Glenn and his team and the executive board at CCPOA have advanced. By the way, I just also want to acknowledge the CCPOA for being part of a lot of the reforms that we are promoting and advancing. Closing down 2 prisons in the state of California. No governor has been able to ever make an announcement like that. Thank you to incredible legislative leaders, Phil Ting among the most committed leaders in this space. And we're doing it in a collaborative spirit. The Valley State Prison Rehabilitation Program, working with his members to be part of this complete transformation of that prison. And so it's in that spirit that we engage and work to endeavor to get people vaccinated, make sure they're healthy and safe. Body cameras, security cameras are part of those efforts as well.
Thank you. And then regarding the college savings accounts for first graders, there was a study a few years ago of your program in San Francisco that you started as mayor, and it found that only 1 out of 5 families who got the account actually added money to it. So 4 out of 5 recipients of those accounts, the amount of money that the government put in was just the only amount that stayed in there. So I'm just wondering, do you think that at a broader scale that this could really be effective for saving up the amounts of money that it actually takes to get a higher education?
All the studies bear out that a young child with as little as $400 in savings, we're proposing $500 if you're foster child or homeless, an additional $500, you're 7 times more likely to enter into an institution of higher learning. I would encourage you to read the study that just came out of Oklahoma, one of the most comprehensive studies, longitudinal studies around the efficacy and success of the college savings account program, to really get a understanding of why we are so enthusiastic. I hope I made it clear my enthusiasm for this program, my belief in its efficacy, my belief in its importance. But I would just note, you could just as easily said 4 out of 5 people never would have even had $1 to imagine going to college on the basis of the contributions in the K through C program. And it is wonderful to see that there was 1 out of 5 that actually built more assets, put more money as a family member. And we want to encourage more of that, but it also says something else about the society we're living in. Just shy of a majority of Americans before this pandemic didn't even have access to $400, almost $500 in an emergency. That's why we're making the historic investments we're making in equity, and that's why we believe in creating assets and opportunity, and doing that for 3.7 million low-income Californians is something I'm enthusiastically backing.
Deborah Kahn, Politico. There's a lot of money in here for climate resiliency and broadband and other things that were originally being envisioned to be funded via bonds on the 2022 ballot. So I was wondering, to what extent do these proposals replace the need for bonds?
I think they substantially do across the spectrum. I would give you another example, the $5.1 billion for drought resiliency that would traditionally be paid for bonds. But that's exactly, I think, what was inspired and envisioned around the Recovery Act, was to get moving and not look at 30-year payback periods, but look at opportunities to make investments in the short run to get people back on their feet, to get our economy moving all across this country. In California, we're picking up on that spirit. The broadband, I mean, we've been waiting a generation for this. I remember talking about broadband for all when I was a parking and traffic commissioner in my 20s in San Francisco. And here we are, decades later, still talking about it. Because of the Biden administration and their support, we have a chance to do it once and for all at a scale we never even could have imagined, $7 billion in the past. We still have to deal with the issue of access and affordability. We have a lot of work to do with the legislature in that space. But this is a transformative moment in American history and California history, and substantially aided, not exclusively, 27 billion of the 100+ billion by the work that the Vice President, the President, and Speaker Pelosi have done in terms of securing a brighter future for millions and millions of Californians.
Just a follow-up question. I know you said you weren't going to say anything more about the offshore wind thing, but could you say any more about it?
No, I appreciate. All I can say is it's long overdue. We've been working on it for years in this state. I remember being the chair of the State Lands Commission as the Lieutenant Governor, discussing opportunities. We were pursuing those opportunities, full disclosure, with the Trump administration to no avail. And now the new administration was just on with the Undersecretary of Defense a few weeks ago, and we just got word that the efforts will progress with her support and advocacy, not just the president's. And of course, I noted a moment ago the essential nature of the partnership with the Department of Interior. We've had multiple conversations directly with the Interior Secretary, and I'll let the rest of the announcement happen with the Biden administration taking the lead.
Hi, Governor. Ashley Zavala with Nexstar Media Group. I wanted to just check in. I know your administration had been reviewing the CDC mask guidelines and was wondering if there was an update there.
Yeah, in fact, you may see Dr. Galley, not Fauci, Dr. Galley here our Dr. Fauci. He's usually in his office in Southern California on Fridays. He's up here, and the whole team will be in my office, many virtually, few in the office shortly to discuss the mask mandate. We have to answer all the questions you would be asking us. How do you enforce? What does it look like in the schools? Do teachers wear them, but or kids wear them? Teachers don't. What happens when you have Starbucks says we're going to continue to do them, but are you going to require enforcement in businesses that are not? I mean, there's a whole host of complexities that we all have to work through. We've been talking to other governors. Some want to quickly default to the CDC guidelines, but now we're starting to appreciate some of the nuances and complexities around enforcement or lack thereof, what it means, what it doesn't. Anyway, working through all of that. We were on the phone with CDC last night. We've been on the phone, of course, last 24 hours with local health officers. It's such a large state, so many different opinions, and so many things to work through, including guidelines, MOUs, memorandums of understanding with unions, issues related to OSHA requirements, updated guidelines that were recently updated around amusement parks and sports, and all of that. I can go on and on. We're vetting, and we hope by late this afternoon to have our guidelines out there and answer as many questions as we can, mindful that many more questions will present themselves, and we'll work through that process, but expect more detailed information later this afternoon.
And on a public health note, just to follow up, an early response to your budget is coming from the County Health Executives Association of California. They're dismayed that there's no new money for local public health departments. They were hoping to, advance their infrastructure and workforce, given all of the work that they have done during this pandemic.
I hope they take a closer look at the budget, historic investments across the spectrum. I hope they also will enjoy the benefits of the incredible leadership of the Biden administration and the direct appropriations going to counties. Many of the partnerships that we form in this budget are county-based partnership. The Medi-Cal expansions, I would imagine they're celebrating with deep enthusiasm. The CalAIM proposal, in particular, the historic investments that we're placing in terms of the Medi-Cal expansions and service supports across the spectrum as it relates to the suspension of the $2 billion being lifted, as well as the COLA. I don't know if I'm a county executive, maybe not health, but CalWorks has a 5% COLA increase. SSP has a 6.4% COLA increase for those with disabilities. There's a lot to celebrate. Hope they'll take a good look at the budget. Many haven't even had a chance to see it, and I'm inspired by the fact that they've been able to review all 400 and 500 pages.
Hello, Governor. This is Angela Hart with Kaiser Health News. Thank you so much for making time for our questions. I have a meaty question for you, and I'd like to get it out because I think it's important. Local health departments did ask this year for $200 million in ongoing funding to support and rebuild underfunded local public health departments, and they say that federal funding has been immensely helpful. But both at the local level and the state level, public health experts say there really must be a state infusion to rebuild the state's public health infrastructure. So can you please explain why, for the third consecutive year in a row, you and your administration have not accepted these critical local public health funding requests? They say that they're important not only for public and communicable disease threats like the one we're facing now, but incredibly important things like STDs, for example, and many bugs that are out there. So can you please explain the reasoning of why you continue to deny this funding?
Well, I think it was self-evident last year. We faced a $54.3 billion projected shortfall. We're in a very different place this year. This is a transformative budget, historic investments across the spectrum, extraordinary investments into public health and public health systems all up and down the state of California, transformational investments into the Medi-Cal system, which is the most richly and robust investment system in the state, not comparable to any other investment in terms of its expanse and reach and its ongoing expectations in terms of support. We put $300 million into public hospitals in this budget. And again, I'm confused by people quickly opining on a budget they may not have had a chance to review. $300 million is in the budget for public hospitals. I hope folks celebrate that. There's many other investments in this space, and I hope when the dust settles, they review all of that and perhaps update their considerations. That said, I also hope people are mindful of this consideration. The governor proposes budgets. Governor works collaboratively with the legislature. The legislature appropriates. In that process, that dialogue, there's give and take. And advocacy that people pursue is not limited to a May revise. That advocacy is afforded over the course of the next number of weeks, working with legislative leaders, working with budget chairs, and we certainly, as always, on the basis of having worked collaboratively with the legislature in the last 2 years, are eager to meet and match the spirit that defines this moment and the needs of 40 million Californians.
Thank you, Governor. And a follow-up healthcare question. I wanted to ask you a question about your expansion of Medicaid to unauthorized immigrants in California. You often talk about how California supports its immigrant population and how California should not leave people behind. And looking at the $75+ billion surplus, the state's looking at state lawmakers. Some state lawmakers and advocates say the state really should pony up and do a full expansion this year of Medicaid to all the state's unauthorized immigrants. Is California prepared to do that, Governor?
Well, my proposal is to do something unprecedented. No other state's ever advanced a commitment to everybody 60 and over, regardless of their status under the Medi-Cal system. I'm incredibly proud of that, proud of the work we did at 026, proud of the work I did as mayor of San Francisco to provide it universally for everybody, regardless of pre-existing condition, ability to pay, or status. As it relates to advocacy, I recognize that advocacy. I support the credible work that Senator Durazo has done, and I thank her in many respects. The announcement we're making today is because of her strong advocacy. To Assembly Member Gonzalez, I thank her for her strong advocacy. It's represented in the commitment we're making today. But I'm mindful, as I noted during the budget presentation, that one-time surpluses can quickly give way to one-time deficits, and that to make ongoing commitments in the multi-billions of dollars crowds out opportunities to do the same in other areas. Budgets are certainly statements of values, but one has to prioritize. It's not limitless. One has to deal with the constraints. Federal government doesn't have to. Mitch McConnell never has. Others disinterested, perhaps, in budgets being balanced. California, we balance budgets. We're enjoying record surplus. But with that comes discipline and considerations into out years and considerations of trade-offs and priorities across the spectrums of needs. But the progress we're making is demonstrable, it's real, it's historic. No other state in America has done what we're proposing to do, and I'm incredibly proud of the proposal we put out today.
Hi, Governor. I'm Tiffany Stecker with Bloomberg. My question is about the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. As your budget lays out, the state is about $20 billion in debt to the federal government. That's going to more than double in the next year. Is there any sort of appetite or plan to reform the system of how unemployment insurance is raised, money is raised and paid out in the state?
Well, we're committing, and thank you for this opportunity. Again, there's so many things that I wanted to share. I imagine I lost 2/3 of you halfway through the presentation, just what I did share. But $950 million is being proposed in this budget, almost $1 billion to pay down a portion of that debt, using stimulus dollars to pay down in terms of the obligations to the federal government under the UI account. So that's a direct answer in response to your question. It shows a commitment we have to get a jump start on that payment. By the way, every state in the country will struggle over the course of many, many years to pay back that debt, as we did in the last recession, the Great Recession. It took a number of years. As an employer myself, with hundreds and hundreds of employees, I recognize the how that system is paid back through the payroll tax, and that's why I hope it will be well received that we're making roughly $1 billion investment to begin that process.
Hi, Governor. Nicole Nixon with Cap Radio News. You have said previously that you would not sign a wealth tax, but some of these proposals in your budget, like the stimulus checks that leave out higher earners, money for universal basic income pilots are forms of redistributing wealth. So I'm curious, given the growing wealth gap we've seen over this past year, are you still against a wealth tax?
Well, a $100 billion comeback budget that makes investments in addressing equity is demonstrable in terms of my values and in terms of our priorities, and I think are broadly shared by the vast majority of members of the legislature. When you are enjoying a 76+ billion and growing operating surplus, I don't think it's time to do tax increases. I say that with respect. I support our progressive tax system, and that progressive tax system, by definition, affords opportunities to batten down the hatches, build reserves, pay down debt, and make the kinds of investments that we're making here today. It's a system that I embrace, and it's a system that we're operating under. And at a state level, I think the consequences of a state tax at a state level would be rather profound.
Maybe let me rephrase that. Would you support cutting taxes for lower and middle income earners?
We just provided the largest tax rebate of any state in American history. Some $12 billion of direct tax relief to middle-class families earning up to $75,000, those that were not beneficiaries of an effort that we advanced earlier in the year through the EITC program, which, by the way, we've close to tripled in the last few years in this state, something we're also very, very mindful and proud of. As it relates to the issue of supports for vast majority of tax filers, I want to remind you that tax rebate goes back to 78%, almost 80% of tax filers in the state.
Governor, I'm Adam Beam with the Associated Press. I know so much of this money this year is one-time money. So just wondering, how can you call this a generational budget if so much of this spending won't be available in the future?
Well, a lot of it is multi-year investments, some 2, some 3, some 5-year investments. We're using one-time dollars in creative ways, including creating an endowment, paying down debt, paying off obligations so we don't have ongoing expenses, paying down deferrals, being creative, providing more resiliency, more capacity for supports into the future. I think one of the most exciting things in our transformational plan for public education is how we've architected it. And I think this is an opportunity, not at this time, to really walk you through how we think not only those expansions will work in the short run, but how they'll be supported over the long run on the basis of demography, on the basis of trend lines, on the basis of our projected expectations. It's really a well thought out blueprint for transformation that quite literally is phrased in a 5-year vernacular lease through the Department of Finance. And I look forward to socializing that just as a proof point of how we're thinking and how we're architecting these supports.
And your budget also includes $35 million for guaranteed income programs.
Yes.
I believe that this would be the largest government commitment to these programs that we've seen yet. I'm just wondering what your goal is for this. I know that the supporters of these programs hope to have these pilot programs and demonstrate to Congress that it's viable and to get Congress to enact. Is that what you're doing? What is your goal with these programs?
As my mother reminded me often, seek first to understand before you're understood. What is so enlivening about what's happening in cities large and small, led by Mayor Tubbs when he was mayor of Stockton, but also amplified by mayors in cities like Oakland and recently in Los Angeles, is the iterative spirit, the innovative spirit, different strategies, different approaches to universal basic income, which by no means is novel. It's been advocated by conservatives and liberals alike. It's been advocated over the course of not just decades, but over centuries as a strategy and solution to address stability and to address anxiety as it relates to the social compact. That said, there are competing points of view as it relates to MINCOME, as it was designed in places like Canada, and UBI, unemployment benefits in places like the United States. And so we want to work through those examples, amplify the work at the local level, and our purpose is to support those efforts, take that data, take that knowledge, and make a case for expansion, contraction, or exploration throughout not only the state, but be a catalyst, as the state of California often is, for conversations all across the country.
Governor Victoria Colliver with Politico. Going back to Medi-Cal expansion for a bit, your proposal is just only slightly broader than the January 2020 proposal for 65 and older. My question is, how open would you be to, say, allowing 26-year-olds who age out on Medi-Cal expansion to stay on it, or to even lowering it to about 50, just given our budget situation is much different than it was back then?
Again, budget situation today is different than it was back then. These are ongoing, permanent expenses that increase over the course of many years. Again, we're not just balancing for today, we're mindful of tomorrow. What we're doing, 65 to 60 is not insignificant, let me assure you, and you can look at the delta in terms of the investment. It is a much more robust investment than we had proposed in January. But we're also doing other things to support our diverse communities up and down the spectrum, expanding Medi-Cal for many other services as well. I noted on postpartum and issues around tailored meals for medically vulnerable individuals and issues related to community workers, promotorists, which we didn't include in this slide presentation. So all of these things are part and parcel of the give and take, and we look forward to working with the legislature and dialoguing around where they are on this discussion.
Hello, I'm Kevin John with ABC 10. Governor, you've highlighted a lot of the efforts to get people stimulus payments and debt relief, and you kind of touched on this earlier in your presentation, but I just want you to elaborate on this a little bit more. As we know, there are still hundreds of thousands of people who are struggling to get their unemployment benefits from EDD. Can they expect any help or relief soon?
Well, we've seen a 35% reduction in the wait time in the last month. We've just hired 400 individuals to the system just in the last 30 or so days, 30 plus days. We are making big, bold commitment in terms of benefits management upgrades and addressing the issues of language access and addressing the backlog in this budget and budget proposal. We have made great strides in reducing the backlog from 1.6 million people. But I'm mindful that we're dealing with the unprecedented. And at the time, the unknown, again, and forgive me, it's not an excuse, it's just a point of reference and context. I got here about 28 months ago. And that system was designed and was stretched in the Great Recession with roughly 3.8 million people applying for unemployment benefits. It ballooned to over 32 million during the heights of this pandemic. It was just not designed for the challenge that this nation, this state has faced. And so we have to reimagine it, we have to support it, and once we move through this pandemic, and we are among the lowest case rates in America. We are among the lowest positivity rates in America. We continue to get shots in arms. Close to 63% now of Californians have received at least one dose. 33 plus million people received a dose, more than all but 5 nations in the world. As we tame this disease, we now move out of it with new budget, with the ability to learn lessons from the experience of the past. I can assure you the next administration will not have to struggle through what all of us had to struggle through at EDD.
Hi, Governor. Alexi Costa from the San Francisco Chronicle. As you've noted several times today, we have just come out of a huge deficit, and until earlier this year, your administration was projecting that we would be headed back into one, yet you've proposed billions and billions of dollars of new ongoing funding. I was wondering if you could talk about your decision to support a lot of these very large new programs in education, healthcare, things like that, rather than, say, boosting up the reserves even further for the future, or, for example, cutting taxes as some of your Republican opponents have suggested we should do to return that money to Californians.
Well, we've got to square the circle of that question with the previous two questions. Why didn't you do more to expand and commit to ongoing? wanting to do more to expand and commit one time. And therein lies the dialectic. There lies the give and take, the balance that is balancing budgets. Some, again, the federal government is not familiar with. States are, and former mayors are as well. And so that's the balancing. $12 billion tax rebate, we don't think is insignificant, simply the largest of any state in American history. Again, 2/3 of all Californians, 78% of tax filers, will receive a minimum of $600. If you have children, another $500 million, and it includes I-10 workers, filers. We are providing resources to pay down $11 billion of pension obligations. That's unprecedented in state's history. That's dealing with the long-term concerns, STRS, PERS, unfunded healthcare liability. We have $4.6 billion in a stabilization account in education, unprecedented in state's history. That didn't exist a couple years ago at all. We have the highest rainy day fund we've had in history. We paid down the vast majority of the debt, almost exclusively. That was inherited from the Schwarzenegger administration. Governor Brown did the vast majority of the work, but we finished the job in the last 2 years. We're addressing all the deferrals, with the exception of $2.6 billion, 80% of them addressed, K through 12, all the others addressed. We did eliminate suspensions on ongoing programs, mindful of the importance of those ongoing commitments. Again, you have to balance those commitments against those previous questions around why not more here? Well, we needed to do more for childcare. We needed to do more for TK. We needed to do more for ACEs screenings. We needed to do more for prenatal care. We needed to do more for roads and bridges. It's all part of the challenge of balancing budgets, and that challenge, again, presents itself to the legislature in partnership and with a collaborative spirit, and we look forward to working with them to work through their points of view as it relates to your question and the previous questions as well.
This is not about going further. This is about, what was your thing? We're looking at, according to your administration's estimates, $1 billion more a year for the Medi-Cal expansion, up to $5 billion a year in the future for the after-school programs. I mean, that's just a few things that are going to be big, ongoing expenditures. So how did you decide that those were worth it, and in other cases, it was too risky for you to commit to ongoing spending?
It's not about risk. It's about making investments and things that we hold dear, and I think that are consistent with the values broadly shared in the state of California. We value our children. I believe that this state is way behind in terms of investing in its children, particularly 0 to 5. And we are behind many other states that provide universal health care, child care, and universal preschool. So TK was, I think, a profoundly important investment and a marker, and that's why we announced it today. As it relates to providing health care, I believe in health care for all, but you can't do everything, but you can make progress, and we made a commitment. I made this crystal clear on the campaign trail. I made it crystal clear the first budget that I am going to continue to pursue that cause, and that's exactly what we're doing once again with this budget. So it's consistent with stated intent, historic commitments that I've made going back 20 years in my public career, and with, I think, the values of not just the people that we represent in the state, but the strong advocacy of many members of the legislature as well.
Governor, thank you. Marissa Perlman from CBS 13. A question about the safe return to schools come fall. School districts across the state have been forced to quarantine kids because of delayed results and these false positives from the state's COVID testing lab. Inspectors found significant deficiencies at the lab in December. They investigated these whistleblower allegations in February, and then your administration vowed to make that investigation public by March. So the two questions I have: why won't CDPH release the lab investigations, and should schools be using the state COVID lab in light of these problems, especially with today's announcement of a full return to in-person learning by fall?
Yes, they should, and you'll have opportunity to talk to Dr. Galley and his representatives in a moment in more detail. We were working with the CEO of a company that's operating that, and I have all the confidence that those issues have been resolved, and some of them are a bit, with respect, overstated. Some were accurate, and we worked to correct them very, very quickly, many months ago. And Dr. Galley and his team will get you more details in a moment.
Sophia Bolag here from the Sacramento Bee. Governor, I know you've talked a bit about some of the ongoing spending commitments that you're making in this budget proposal, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more specifically about why you feel confident the state will be able to afford those ongoing commitments in the future. I know you talked in January about the threat of, deficits moving forward in the out years, and I'm wondering if that's changed. What are your financial analysts saying in terms of projected deficits or surpluses in future years?
Well, this state's coming roaring back. Our unemployment rate is still stubbornly high. The sector of our economy that was disproportionately impacted by this pandemic-induced recession is in the hospitality, food, and entertainment industry. $145+ billion hospitality industry alone is going to come roaring back, and that's why that $95 million Visit California investment is so important to remind people of the opportunities anew to invest their travel dollars back either within the state or coming into the state. No more extraordinary state to visit and to recreate, including for Californians to visit their own state than California. And so we have great confidence in our economic resiliency, our recovery. 99 IPOs year to date. 99 IPOs year to date. 41% of America's jobs, as I noted a moment ago, coming from the state of California in February, 275,700 in February and March, mindful that the April numbers will be much more modest when they come out in a week or so, putting more money into the rainy day reserve, historic money in the rainy day reserve, historic money in our stabilization accounts, including public education, historic amount of money paying down long-term obligations, including $10.9 billion for pension and retirement liabilities. One-time money for one-time purpose overwhelmingly, but there are areas of ongoing investments, and that's typical in any budget. By the way, there were commitments last year, even with cuts that we made to ongoing commitments, even with that historic shortfall last year. But we're mindful that our economic recovery has just begun, and so the confidence that we have is in the future. The confidence that we have is in California. In California, it's 50+% of America's venture capital came into the state of California, more than double the next three states combined with respect to Massachusetts and New York and Texas. We have more startups this year than any time in previous history. We have seen remarkable resiliency in this state, and now we're enjoying historic revenue in this state. And so that gives us confidence in the future, confidence that we can make long-term investments and ongoing expenditure commitments at the same time that we recover. We also recognize in closing the imperative of making sure we have the backs of people that were most impacted by this pandemic. And people are hurting. People are struggling. Single moms out there that couldn't afford childcare, or their childcare daycare centers shut down during the pandemic, and even if they could afford it, they couldn't access it. As a consequence, they couldn't go back to work. And now you have folks across the country who want to cut their unemployment benefits. And some are criticizing them for taking care of their kids and helping work through this incredibly challenging time. People that are earning minimum wage and barely getting any money in tips. They need support. They need help. People out there still scared to death about this pandemic, that are still a little skittish and not ready to go full bore back in the workforce. We need to be there for them as well. And so those are commitments, not just one time, but we want to be there for working poor and the middle class in the long run as well. Our pre-existing condition wasn't literally just affordability, housing, homelessness. It's income and wealth disparity. And we've got to reconcile that, and that needs to be done over the course of many, many years. And I'm proud of the investments we're making in the EITC, proud of the investments we're making in expanding eligibility and coverage for Medi-Cal. I'm proud of the expansion and support for people with developmental disabilities and people that need those supports and need to know that we have their back, not just 1 year, but over the course of many, many years.
So, Governor, just to clarify, given all those factors you just outlined, are you expecting California's revenue to continue to grow in future years?
Yeah, I expect as the economy expands, revenue will continue to grow. in many ways, we're still not back to pre-pandemic levels in every sector. We're enjoying historic windfall, particularly as it relates to capital gains. We're mindful of the stock markets and the vagaries of not just the markets themselves and capital gains, but also the nature of our progressive tax system. No one's denying that. And so, look, yeah, no, I expect optimism in our future. We're not going to stand still. We're coming roaring back. And roaring back is about growth and renewal. We don't live in a framework of scarcity. Our mindset's of abundance. That's California spirit. I talked about the tentpole of the American economy. California has long been the tentpole of the American economy. 3.9% GDP growth over a 5-year period before this pandemic. No other state came close, or at least the United States itself didn't come close, and no other large state that claims to compete with us, like Florida and Texas, outperformed the state of California over those 5 years. So I expect growth, I expect expansion, I expect new opportunities, revenue, discovery, innovation, entrepreneurialism, but you got to invest in those growth engines. That's our people, that's our talent, our physical and human infrastructure. It's our conveyor belt for talent. The university system, $2.3 billion in this budget, just to CSU and UC, paying down the full cost of attendance, $4 billion of student housing opportunities to reduce that cost substantially, dealing with the food insecure and housing insecure, paying down rental obligations, water and utility bills, so people have confidence once again and get back into the workforce. Boy, I'm long California, no other state like it in our union.
Governor Brian Hickey with KCRA. Before I get to my question, I want to ask a question on behalf of the viewers I've been monitoring on our Facebook Live. Many of them state employees wanting to know the status of the pay cut. They're hearing all of this about the surplus, wanting to know when they're going to get their pay restored.
Well, we're in the middle of negotiations with their labor representatives, and so that is all being negotiated in real time. In the 2 contracts, SCIU and CCPOA, those contracts have already addressed those cuts, and we're working with all the other bargaining units with the intention of restoring and supporting their workforce, our workforce, and their representatives. That said, I want to just acknowledge our workers. You know, it's often lost. I've met many people that just seem to habitually be in a framework of negativity, even when there's much to be grateful for in life. But they often say, well, public employees, you know, they don't show up to work. They're not doing anything. Some of the worst employees out there, and, you know, they haven't done anything for me. Well, just consider it. Every state employee took a big pay cut last year so that we didn't have to make cuts to critical services and supporting vulnerable Californians. I'm really proud of our workforce, proud of their resilience, everything they suffered through. They were there for us last year. They took wage cuts. And so to those folks on Facebook Live, I want to thank them for their service, their resiliency, and let you know that we intend to be there for you. You were there for us last year. We're going to be there for you this year.
And Governor, back to my question now. Just last night, I was talking to a neighbor who's a local business owner of a very popular restaurant here in Sacramento. He said even if given the opportunity to open 100% right now, he can't get employees to fill those jobs. How do we transition from this opportunity to help people in their time of need to getting them back to work, to getting them off of those payments, basically, and getting them back out to what they want to do, and that is to go to work?
Well, the supplemental unemployment insurance expires in roughly, give or take 90 days. So in many respects, that's academic as it relates to that $300 supplemental, which seems to be all the rage for some folks as the culprit for some of these issues. I think it's a lot more complex, and I don't say that intellectually as a guy who started 9 restaurants. I say that with intimate knowledge and understanding of the challenges of the industry. That said, I think that issue resolves itself over the course of the next number of months, and it's beginning to resolve itself. I know it wasn't reflected in hindsight in the rear view with the April numbers, but I'm confident, truly confident, that it will substantially resolve itself into the future.
Governor John Myers from the Los Angeles Times. The hour is late, so let me try to be brief with a couple of things to get you to explain. I want to talk about the tax rebates in the budget that are effective the GAN limit. You've talked several times about the high number of taxpayers who are going to get it back, but largely they're not the people who paid it, because they're people above the $75,000 income level that paid a lot of that tax. What do you say to people who think this might be some redistribution of wealth that you were proposing, because the GAN limit doesn't specifically say that's the group that would get the money.
We have a progressive tax policy. I guess you could say that in the abstract or just independent of this budget, every budget, because that's the nature of our progressive tax system. So that's been the case, predates this administration, prior administrations, codified not once but twice by the voters of the state of California in terms of the increase, that progressivity. As it relates to the middle class, with respect to someone that enjoys, and you'll see my tax returns next week, is enjoyed a little bit more financial support. You know, we weren't impacted as much as those middle class families, my family. We had the resources. And I'm proud of the fact that some of the dollars that I'm putting back into the California coffers as a taxpayer are going to help those single moms out there. I'm really proud of that. And I hope others are as well. The top 1%, and this is not, I don't begrudge success. I'm not one of those Democrats. I aspire to it, and I hope everybody else aspires. I'm not here to tear anyone down. I want to thank those taxpayers. Thank them for their hard work. Thank them for the generosity of spirit. Thank you for their innovation, their contributions, for their investments, their risk-taking. And Californians are all the beneficiaries. And in return, we're going to give them the finest system of higher education in the world, historic investments. We're going to give them better roads and bridges. We're going to give them more talented workforce. We're going to give them things that few other states provide in return. That's what our progressive tax policy is all about. Those kinds of investments have paid huge dividends, built the biggest middle class in America, helped build the biggest middle class in the world, the United States, with those same principles, those same values. So I think those middle class families deserve the money, those essential workers that were on the front lines that paid a huge price, physically, their health, not just financially, during this pandemic. And I'm proud of the success of people in the higher income brackets that, candidly, in the aggregate, have never done better in recent history. And so that's what our progressive tax base is all about.
And then just prospectively looking forward, we haven't heard you talk a lot about the June 15th date in a while, so I want to talk about June 15th. As that approaches, what's your thinking on either lifting the existing emergency order that the state is under or demonstrably downsizing it some way? Can you talk about what you're prepared to do and what's going to change from your administration as June 15th approaches?
Well, we've been talking a lot about June 15th. I think 2 or 3 occasions this week we talked about, quote unquote, moving beyond the blueprint. We are still on target. I'm asked this question at every opportunity to speak to your colleagues, members of the press, and the public. We are still on track to move beyond the blueprint on June 15th. We continue, though we've seen a decline in the administration of doses of vaccines and the demand, it hasn't been as precipitous as some other states, though we're mindful and watching those numbers very, very closely. So as we continue to vaccinate more and more people, it's on par with our expectations to date. We get closer and closer now at 63, just shy of 63% of individuals receiving at least a first dose. If we continue to see these positivity rates as they are today, 1.1%, we see that stability, no question. We will get there on or before June 15th. So I'm confident of that. But again, we just continue to need to be mindful of the power and potency of these vaccines to get us there with more assurance. And I know that this the mask guidelines coming from the CDC have created some new anxiety for many, that it may be too soon, too much. And so we're adjudicating all that, as I noted earlier. And I think that also plays a role. It may not be a mandatory space, but a voluntary space as well to help mitigate the spread, particularly these variants as well.
Governor Carla Marinucci from Politico. Just to follow up quickly on John's question, you've talked about providing the largest tax rebate in American history, and that 2/3 of all filers are going to get a check. But as you know, your Republican opponents have long argued California is one of the highest tax states in the nation. There's been an exodus of the best and brightest here. And they're pointing to this $76 billion surplus as Exhibit A, basically saying that this proves that California taxpayers are overtaxed here. Well, how do you answer them?
Well, there hasn't been a massive exodus of the best and the brightest. That's objectively untrue. In fact, not only have we enjoyed 99 IPOs this year, which is proof of our resiliency, so is that surplus proof of California's resiliency and the fact that we're coming roaring back in the fact that this state continues to outperform in almost every measure and every index. Let me be specific. The Bloomberg Index of Innovation, once again, number one, the state of California, again this year. Read Fortune magazine, where they talked about the fastest growing companies in the United States, disproportionate number in California. Talk about Time magazine and their rankings of the most influential companies. Interesting way of looking at business. The most influential companies in the world. Of the 64 that were in the United States, 31 are in California. Look at the venture capital, record amount of venture capital in the state of California last year. I think facts matter, and I know there's some high-profile individuals of great net worth that have made great wealth in California and have chosen to relocate, but there's also hundreds and hundreds of people that have not only moved in, but also have generated enormous wealth just in the last few months. I think those 99 IPOs give you some evidence of that kind of prosperity. That said, California has a progressive tax rate. No question about that. It's not new. We haven't increased taxes in California since 2012. The last tax increase, general tax increase, income tax increase to be specific, occurred by the voters in 2012. If those individuals you're referring to wish to go back to the voters, they'll have to do it on the basis of those voters not once but twice supporting that increase. Prop 30, Prop 55, 55 by even larger margin than Prop 30. They can't do that on the basis of a press release, a tweet, a desire, or even through a legislative process. That would have to be done by going back to the voters and making a case anew. I would encourage them and you to consider this. Kiplinger's well-known financial publication did an analysis of taxes in this country, but not through the lens of just the small number of 1% earners, but through the lens of all of us in this room, the lens of the vast majority of Californians and Americans. And they looked at what the average American pays, average American defined by 50 states. And California came out in that survey as a tax-friendly state, right there around Texas. So I think it's incredibly important, and I say this with respect, when people talk about taxes in California, they need to talk about taxes in California, not just taxes on the high-end earners in California, but look at tax policy throughout the state, including property tax rates in the state that are more modest than the vast majority of states that they often identify as more tax friendly. But friendly to whom is the point I'm expressing. Well, with that, extending the opportunity to make that point, I'm grateful, and the opportunity to be here making this presentation. I think the questions only highlight the remarkable diversity of opinion around what is the budget balancing process. And I think that's a very healthy thing, and I look forward to more healthy dialogue and deliberation with the California legislature. Again, I just want to close with expressing my deep gratitude to each and every member of the legislature, all their hard work, to their incredible leaders, the Pro Tem, Tony Atkins, and to the Assembly Speaker, Anthony Rendon. Their collaborative spirit has led to early action that's unprecedented in California's history to help the most vulnerable Californians. I look forward to taking that spirit and building on that as this state not only comes roaring back, but as we build a generational mindset and pass a most transformative budget in decades in the state of California. Thank you all very, very much.
I know everyone is hungry, so I just wanted to quickly say thank you to the great people at the Department of Finance who have had, just like all of you, quite a year. And this is just, it's always very intense at this May revision process. But this year, we also had the opportunity to allocate an extraordinary number of federal funds as well. So it has been quite an effort, and I'm very appreciative of their dedication to a job well done. I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure issue and about, why the one-time versus ongoing. And I actually just quickly did the calculations. And in our commitment to one-time versus ongoing is actually quite similar than in prior years. And that's about 90% are going to one-time expenditures and 10% ongoing. But the reason why that's important is we continue to have an incredibly volatile revenue base. This year, we have over $200 billion in capital gains realizations embedded in our forecast. We don't expect that if you look back at history, the last two recessions, you've seen capital gains plummet with the stock market, and the stock market did drop by around 50%. But in both of the last two recessions. So there's a lot of risk in the future forecasts. We do assume growth for the big three revenues, but we also see that the expenditure growth is still very much on par with those revenue growth and is actually a little bit higher than revenue growth. So if you look at our multi-year forecast, because we're always looking at the budget year, but also the three additional years in the future, we do see the structural surpluses, that's the revenues minus the expenditures, shrinking over the multi-year, and we're about balanced in that very out year. There's a lot of inherent risk in forecasts of both revenues and expenditures, but it is definitely something that we're very mindful in building this budget and really making sure that we can protect the programs that we currently have and can make sure that we are not creating more instability in the future. So that's, I think, just broad what I wanted to say about that. And then just a little bit about how incredibly uncertain things continue to be. They are a lot better than January's forecast. There's also $3 trillion of federal money that was pumped into the entire national economy since our December forecast. That's a big reason why we were able to improve the forecast, but we still are mindful that we've only added back about 44% of the jobs that were lost in that March and April period. And there's still a lot of work to do, especially in the low-wage sectors, in leisure and hospitality, where there were really the most massive job losses. And that is one of the things that really is informing our approach in this budget, is how are we providing immediate relief to those households that have been hardest hit during the pandemic. And it's definitely the sectors that have a lot of low-wage workers that have been hit hard and continue to be, and are the ones that have not added the jobs back. I wanted to talk a little bit about public health, too. There was some good questions about that. I think that, we spent a lot of time thinking about this issue as we were preparing the May revision. There have been incredible amounts of money that have been distributed to local public health efforts, the state public health efforts, over $3 billion that's been allocated in the last year to county public health. Obviously, a lot of that going to the incredible efforts to respond to the pandemic. And those numbers actually don't even include the additional money for the vaccine efforts and the testing efforts. So there has been an incredible amount of money allocated. We are committed over the next 6 months, 9 months, to really work on developing a plan to really understand how we can address the inequities that were really laid out and were made so clear during this pandemic, and really think about how we better integrate all of the efforts of our public health system with the healthcare delivery system as well. So we have $3 million set aside to do some additional work and study on this question, and we're planning to come back next year with a more thoughtful and thought-out proposal about the different roles of the county and the state, and also how public health can really inform the healthcare delivery system and improving outcomes for disproportionately for our vulnerable communities that have had disproportionately less access to healthcare. I also wanted to mention parks. That was just one of the things. The governor really did a comprehensive job going through the budget, but we have a really exciting package on parks that the first partner actually got up in the middle of the press conference and said, what about this? Because it's something she's been also working on. We have over $200 million in additional money for a variety of investments that are really to enhance access at our parks. A portion of it would be to develop more programs that are really plug and play for K-12 educators so that they can access those parks in different types of field trips and other learning opportunities, opportunities for more experiential education. And then we also have money to develop more local parks, especially in areas that are park poor, is a terminology that's used for areas that don't have a lot of access to parks. And then we also have an incredible investment of about $500 million in the state park system, including doing a lot more restoration on our park lands for wildlife, but also deferred maintenance of our mini facilities, and then restoring a historic investment in developing a new Indian Heritage Center here in the Sacramento area. I think I will just go ahead and answer any questions at this point, because I know people are hungry and gone. But that's okay.
Hi, Keely. It's
Yes.
Adam Beam with
Hi.
AP. So I noticed in one of the tables, it's mentioned that there was a big decline in the EPA budget. I think it was like 51%.
Yes.
And then even in K through 12, a decline. So I was wondering if there was some technical reason for
no,
that.
it is. I was looking at those numbers because it's always there's a story to tell. The EPA one is an anomaly related to the extraordinary size of the cleanup operation at the campfire. So that was booked mainly in the current year, and so what you see is the removal of those costs because they were one time in nature, and that's why you see the decline. K-12 is also, when we're doing the Proposition 98 budget, we're always updating a 3-year period. So this year, because revenues are so strong in the current year above the forecast that we had in January, that means Proposition 98 monies that are driven from the current year revenues are also significantly higher. So that's not how the money goes to districts, but it's just how we calculate how much money is owed under the Proposition 98 guarantee.
And the decline, it looked like personal income tax collections were also going to decline from last year. Is that because of all the rebates and refunds and stuff?
So the PIT forecast, it's also about looking at the forecast, and so it was really revised upward in the current year. So we do expect a lot more revenue in the current year as the trends are continuing. But in the budget year and then into the multi-year, we do not assume that $200 billion in capital gains realizations lasts the entire multi-year. We do assume a more normal rate of growth than the growth rates we've been seeing. And yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
you.
that's okay.
There's also, I think, $1 billion in there for some Olympic projects.
Yeah.
Do you have any more details on what those are?
Yeah, no, it's $1 billion that is for high priority transit and other projects in the LA area as we march towards the Olympics, really getting that LA area ready for the influx of people that will be coming hopefully far post-COVID now, then they'll be in the rearview mirror 2028. And so it's a variety of different projects in the LA area that we are proposing general fund sources, so additional monies than the transportation monies that are already programmed.
Is it stadiums and?
No, this is for transportation infrastructure.
Hi, Keely. Sophia here from the B. I wanted to ask a little bit of clarification about the proposal to expand Medi-Cal to undocumented immigrants.
Oh, yeah.
I believe it says in the proposal that it's going to be $1 billion ongoing, and I'm wondering, is that per year? Or I'm assuming that's a multi-year.
Yeah. So the phase-in, we assume. So first of all, we assume that the phase-in starts in May of the budget year. So that's May of 2022. So it's a smaller amount, 69 million. In the budget year. But then when fully implemented, which we do assume will take several years, that the population will grow over multiple years. We do have an estimate of $1 billion. So that's sort of the full year all-in cost. It's a mix of total of a little bit of federal funds and general fund.
Got it. And what's the estimate for how many people would be helped by that proposal?
Oh, I probably have that, but not at my fingertips, so let me look here. We assume by the end of the multi-year, so that's in 24-25, that there will be 89,000 individuals that are helped.
Got it. And one thing I just want to clarify, I know that previous LAO calculations had showed that that proposal would cost like a quarter of $1 billion.
My staff was just sending me a note about this.
Oh, okay.
It's, these are incredibly difficult things to predict. We don't, we are all looking at the same data sources of what this population, what size this population may be. So that's something, that we continue to refine, and this is our best estimate was the $1 billion, but I understand the LAO is much lower than that, and we will be reviewing their assumptions and in the coming weeks.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi, Director Bosler. Am I pronouncing your last name correct?
Bosler, yeah.
Bosler. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you,
okay.
Keely, for making time. This is Angela with Kaiser Health News. I don't know if you have the budget in front of you, but on page 98, under the public health section, there's a few bolded sections that talk about public health spending. On the first one, the COVID-19 response costs, that $1.08 billion, is that the American Rescue Act funding? Is it all federal funding?
So the COVID-19 response costs, that is related to the state costs related to the COVID-19, and we are proposing to cover all of the COVID-19 response costs with a form of federal funds. It's a mix. Some of them are FEMA reimbursed, and then some are funded by the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and then we also have additional costs covered by the American Rescue Plan Act.
And this funding is going to CDPH, right?
Yeah, that is money that they've been for staffing and the laboratory operation, vaccination efforts, and then also the medical surge capacity. So,
but that's the state level. Those are state level.
Those are state level. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to thank you for that. And then on the $3 million for the pandemic response review, is that federal or state funds or a mix of both?
I believe that is general fund.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, pandemic review. It's
right underneath the other one.
Yeah, that's general fund.
That's general fund. Okay. Great. And then on the American Rescue Act, I think that's the most recently passed federal relief package.
That's the big one, and the particular source of money that governors had a discretion to allocate is the state and local pot of money, and that's $27 billion. And we actually have a table in the May revision that shows the full allocation, and that is on page 36.
And that shows the allocation to the local level as well?
There are some monies that will end up at the local level, but they are a whole variety of our proposals that we're funding with those money. And then it's really important to note that state and local funding, the state received $27 billion, the counties already received directly $7.7 billion, and I'm not sure if they've already received it, but that they've been allocated, and then the metropolitan cities $7 billion, and then smaller cities will get another $1.2 billion, and tribal governments will get $190 million, and that is all in addition to the $27 billion.
Okay, yeah, I was unclear about how the federal funds and that relief package were going to be distributed, so I may follow up with your office.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot in that federal relief package, to be honest. This is just one of the components, and many of the other components, we're still awaiting guidance, and we've been putting applications in when they become available, but that will continue to happen over the next several weeks and probably months.
And then just one more question about, in the January budget, I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but
okay.
I believe there was a line item for $372 million maybe for vaccines. It was, do you remember that? And that
Yes,
I believe
of
was
course.
a federal.
Yes.
I don't know if that's the right number.
Yeah, so yes, the vaccine numbers are in the COVID-19 direct response cost tables, and that is on page 30. And we now have our best estimate of the cost of the vaccine distribution and administration is $1.4 billion. And again, those monies are going to be 100% funded by the federal government, either through FEMA or through one of the other federal funding
And there was a
sources.
discussion before about, is that money going to go to the locals? And locals were saying they thought maybe they weren't going to get any. So is that money going to locals at all?
Some of the very large epidemiology lab grant of $1.1 billion was allocated directly to locals to help support their efforts. And then there's been a lot of joint efforts, and some of this money has gone to locals as well as through the third-party agreement provider as well.
Hi, Keely. There are no more questions this afternoon.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
For the latest information regarding the COVID-19 pandemic in Cupertino, please visit cupertino.org/coronavirus.